November 24, 1971. It was the day before Thanksgiving. At Portland International Airport, an ordinary-looking businessman quietly walked into history. He didn't attract attention. He wasn't in a hurry. To everyone around him, he looked like just another traveler. He bought a one-way ticket to Seattle under the name Dan Cooper. Nothing about his appearance seemed unusual, but hidden inside his briefcase was a plan that would puzzle investigators for decades. Flight 305 prepared for takeoff. None of the passengers realized they were sharing the cabin with the man who would soon become one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. At 2:50 p.m., Northwest Orient Flight 305 lifted off from Portland, beginning what seemed like a routine 30-minute flight to Seattle. He ordered a bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette, and waited patiently. There was no panic, no sign of urgency. Then, without warning, he wrote a short message, folded it, and handed it to a flight attendant. Thinking it was another passenger trying his luck, she ignored it, until he quietly said, "Miss, you'd better read that note." The note claimed he had a bomb. In that instant, an ordinary flight became one of the most famous hijackings in history. To prove he wasn't bluffing, Cooper briefly opened his briefcase. Inside appeared to be a homemade bomb. Staying remarkably calm, the flight attendant informed the flight crew. The captain now knew the aircraft had been hijacked. The cockpit contacted air traffic control. Within minutes, federal authorities were listening to every word. On the ground, law enforcement began preparing for a crisis unlike anything they had faced before. Cooper's demands were clear: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting when the plane landed in Seattle. Authorities made a difficult decision. To save every passenger, they agreed to Cooper's demands. 10,000 $20 bills were quickly gathered, and every serial number was recorded. As darkness settled over Seattle, the airport prepared for the arrival of Flight 305. Every move was carefully planned. After circling in the air for nearly 2 hours, Flight 305 finally landed in Seattle. The ransom money and 4 parachutes were delivered exactly as requested. Cooper had kept his promise. No passengers had been harmed. One by one, the passengers walked to safety. But for the flight crew, the most dangerous part of the night was only beginning. Cooper wasn't finished. He ordered the crew to fly toward Mexico, keeping the aircraft low and slow. With only the flight crew still on board, Flight 305 took off once again, this time carrying only 1 passenger. He inspected the parachutes, secured the ransom money, and quietly prepared for what came next. Outside, the weather was getting worse. Rain, freezing temperatures, and powerful winds surrounded the aircraft. Then, Cooper walked to the rear of the aircraft and lowered the Boeing 727's rear staircase while still in flight. The flight crew stayed inside the cockpit, following Cooper's orders. No one knew what he was doing behind them. Alone in the cabin, Cooper made his final preparations. Beyond the open staircase, only darkness awaited. Somewhere over the forests of Washington, D.B. Cooper disappeared into the storm. Moments later, the crew felt a sudden change in the aircraft's balance. They believed Cooper had jumped. By sunrise, one of the largest manhunts in FBI history had begun. But the man known as D.B. Cooper had vanished without a trace. As the aircraft landed safely, FBI agents began searching for clues. Every inch of the cabin became part of the investigation. Cooper had left behind almost nothing. One of the few items recovered was a simple black clip-on tie. Investigators analyzed every fingerprint and every piece of evidence, hoping one detail would reveal the hijacker's true identity. Working with eyewitness descriptions, the FBI created the face the world would come to know as D.B. Cooper. The investigation was given a code name Norjak. It would become one of the longest and most expensive manhunts in FBI history. Search teams spread across forests, mountains, and rivers. Thousands of square miles were examined, but there was no sign of Cooper. If he survived the jump, he had vanished into one of the most unforgiving landscapes in America. Investigators searched for a body, a parachute, or even the ransom money. They found none of them. Weeks turned into months. The investigation produced hundreds of leads, but not one could identify the mysterious hijacker. Interestingly, the man had purchased his ticket under the name Dan Cooper. But after an early reporting mistake, newspapers called him D.B. Cooper, a name that would become legendary. Years passed. The investigation never stopped, but every new lead ended the same way with more questions than answers. Then, nearly 9 years later, an ordinary family outing changed the investigation forever. While digging in the sand, 8-year-old Brian Ingram discovered something no one expected: bundles of cash. The serial numbers matched perfectly. The money had come from Cooper's ransom. But one question remained: how did the money end up here, while the man who took it was never found? One theory suggests Cooper never survived the jump. Heavy rain, freezing temperatures, and rugged wilderness made survival extremely difficult. Yet no body, no parachute, and no confirmed remains were ever found. Another theory proposed that Cooper had military or parachute training. His knowledge of the Boeing 727 raised many questions. Over the years, investigators examined hundreds of suspects. None could be conclusively identified as the hijacker. With every theory, one fact remained unchanged: the true identity of the man known as D.B. Cooper was still a mystery. Over the decades, investigators examined hundreds of possible suspects. A few names stood out, but none could be proven. Every new suspect seemed convincing at first. But sooner or later, each theory fell apart under closer investigation. Names like Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., Kenneth Christensen, and Robert Rackstraw often appeared in the investigation. Yet none were conclusively identified as Cooper. As each lead reached a dead end, the mystery only grew deeper. In the end, the FBI had a face, but not a name. Decades passed, but the mystery refused to fade. The Norjak case remained one of the FBI's most famous unsolved investigations. In 2016, the FBI officially ended its active investigation, choosing to focus its resources on newer cases. Even after decades, only a handful of clues remained: a tie, a small amount of ransom money, and countless unanswered questions. Did Cooper survive the jump? Did he live the rest of his life in complete anonymity? Or did the wilderness keep his secret forever? No one knows. More than 50 years later, one man, one flight, and one impossible escape continue to challenge investigators and captivate the world. A single airplane, a briefcase, a ransom, and one unanswered question that has survived for more than half a century. Thousands of hours were spent searching for answers, yet the most important one was never found. Was Cooper an ordinary man who achieved the impossible, or someone whose true identity will never be known? Somewhere beneath these forests, or perhaps far beyond them, the final chapter of this story may still remain hidden. The man boarded the flight as Dan Cooper. The world would remember him as D.B. Cooper. Decades later, the evidence remains, but the man behind it has never been identified. Some mysteries are solved by evidence. Others become legends. The mystery of D.B. Cooper remains suspended somewhere between the two. If you enjoyed this investigation, subscribe to the Hidden Dossier for more true crime and unsolved mysteries. Until the next dossier, stay curious.